Picture this, September 4th, 476 AD. The Western Roman Empire, a civilization that ruled the Mediterranean world for over 5 centuries, ceases to exist. Not through catastrophic battle, not through divine intervention, but through a simple demand from a barbarian warlord barely 20 years old. Odoacer, a Germanic chieftain whose name most Romans couldn't pronounce, marches into Ravenna and deposes the last emperor of the West. What follows isn't chaos, it's transformation. Within 50 years, warrior kings from the forests beyond the Rhine rule from Iberia to North Africa, building kingdoms on Rome's corpse. This is their story. The Western Roman Empire didn't collapse overnight. It bled out across the entire 5th century. By 450 AD, the empire that once commanded legions from Britannia to Mesopotamia controlled little beyond Italy, southern Gaul, and fragments of Hispania. The real power wasn't in the hands of emperors anymore. It resided with Germanic military commanders who led the empire's armies, negotiated its treaties, and increasingly dictated its policies. These weren't mindless savages storming civilized gates. The barbarians had been Rome's neighbors, trading partners, and frequently its soldiers for generations. Tribes like the Visigoths, Vandals, Burgundians, and Franks had served in Roman armies, learned Roman tactics, and absorbed Roman administrative practices. Many of their leaders spoke Latin, understood Roman law, and married into Roman aristocratic families. They didn't want to destroy Roman civilization, they wanted to rule it. The migration period, what historians call the Völkerwanderung, accelerated dramatically after 375 AD, when the Huns exploded westward from the Eurasian steppes. Germanic tribes, caught between Roman territory and Hun aggression, pushed increasingly into the empire's provinces. What began as refugee crises evolved into settlement negotiations, then military alliances, and finally into something Rome never anticipated: autonomous kingdoms within imperial territory. Valentinian III, who ruled the West from 425 to 455, spent his reign watching provinces slip away. The Visigoths established themselves in southwestern Gaul and Hispania. The Vandals crossed into North Africa in 429, seizing Rome's richest grain-producing region by 439. The Burgundians settled in the Rhone Valley. Britain, abandoned by Roman legions in 410, fragmented into warring Romano-British kingdoms facing Saxon invasions. The Suebi carved out territory in northwestern Iberia. Then came 476. The teenage emperor Romulus Augustulus, mockingly nicknamed Little Augustus, sat on a throne commanding an army he didn't control in a capital city, Ravenna, that wasn't even Rome. His father Orestes, a Roman general, had installed him the previous year. But Odoacer, leading a coalition of Germanic federati troops, had a simpler solution to the empire's problems. Why maintain the fiction of Roman imperial authority when the reality was already Germanic military control? On September 4th, Odoacer deposed Romulus, pensioned him off to a comfortable villa in Campania, and sent the imperial regalia, the crown, scepter, and purple robes, east to Constantinople. The message was clear. There would be only one Roman emperor now ruling from the east. The West would be governed by a new order. Odoacer took the title King of Italy, not Emperor. He ruled as a Germanic monarch administering Roman territory. But Odoacer was just the beginning. He represented a transitional moment, a military strongman still operating within a Roman framework. The men who followed him would go further, building kingdoms that transformed Roman provinces into barbarian successor states that would shape Europe for the next millennium. Resembled a patchwork of competing Germanic kingdoms, each carved from Roman provinces, each claiming legitimacy through different means. Understanding these kingdoms means understanding the men who forged them and the strategic calculations that drove their ambitions. The Visigoths, under King Euric, controlled the most powerful successor state. Their kingdom stretched from the Loire River in central Gaul southward through most of Iberia, approximately 500,000 square kilometers of former Roman territory. Euric, who ruled from 466 to 484, was no illiterate warrior. He commissioned the Codex Euricianus, the first written Germanic law code, blending Roman legal principles with Gothic customs. His court in Toulouse functioned as a legitimate royal administration, collecting taxes, minting coins, and maintaining diplomatic relations with Constantinople. Euric commanded an estimated 25,000 to 30,000 Gothic warriors, supplemented by Hispanic Roman auxiliaries. His strategic advantage was demographic depth. His kingdom contained millions of Roman subjects whose administrative expertise and agricultural production sustained Gothic military power. In North Africa, the Vandal kingdom under Geiseric represented a different model entirely. The Vandals crossed from Hispania into Africa in 429 with approximately 80,000 people, warriors, women, and children combined. By 439, they controlled Carthage, Rome's wealthiest provincial capital. What made the Vandals uniquely dangerous wasn't their land army, but their fleet. Geiseric transformed the Vandals into a naval power, raiding Sicily, Sardinia, Corsica, and even sacking Rome itself in 455. His kingdom monopolized North African grain exports, giving him economic leverage over Italy. When Geiseric died in 477, his grandson Huneric inherited a maritime empire that strangled Mediterranean commerce. The Burgundians occupied a smaller but strategically vital territory in the Rhone Valley and regions surrounding Lake Geneva. With perhaps 10,000 warriors, they couldn't match Visigothic or Vandal power, but their location gave them control over the Alpine passes connecting Italy to Gaul. The Burgundian kingdom under King Gundobad practiced pragmatic cooperation with local Roman aristocrats, integrating Roman administrative structures more thoroughly than most Germanic states. Italia under Odoacer represented the most Roman of the successor states. Odoacer maintained the Roman Senate, preserved Roman taxation systems, and governed through established imperial bureaucracy. His power base consisted of approximately 15,000 to 20,000 Germanic foederati troops, a mix of Syrian, Herulian, and Rugian warriors. But his legitimacy remained questionable. He ruled Italy without imperial authorization, recognized nominally by Constantinople, but never truly accepted. The Eastern Emperor Zeno viewed Odoacer as a temporary inconvenience. Which brings us to the Ostrogoths. Since the 450s, the Ostrogoths had served as Constantinople's federates in the Balkans, sometimes allies, frequently threats. By the 480s, their king, Theodoric the Amal, commanded the most formidable military force in the Eastern Mediterranean, potentially 30,000 warriors plus families, totaling perhaps 100,000 people. Theodoric had been educated in Constantinople, understood Roman politics intimately, and possessed the military strength to take what he wanted. The strategic landscape was unstable. Each kingdom competed for legitimacy, territory, and Roman imperial recognition. The Visigoths and Vandals had consolidated power. The Burgundians played intermediary. Odoacer held Italy without clear authority. And Theodoric, watching from the east, saw an opportunity. The Eastern Emperor Zeno, desperate to remove the Ostrogothic threat from his own territories, would soon offer Theodoric something irresistible: Italy itself. The stage was set for the next great transformation. In 488, Theodoric the Amal led his entire Ostrogothic nation, warriors, families, wagons, and livestock, westward from the Balkans toward Italy. This wasn't a raid, it was migration with imperial blessing. Emperor Zeno had made Theodoric an offer: invade Italy, depose Odoacer, and rule as Constantinople's representative in the west. Theodoric would gain a kingdom. Zeno would rid himself of a dangerous neighbor. It was realpolitik at its most cynical. The Ostrogothic migration stretched across hundreds of kilometers. Approximately 100,000 people crossed the Julian Alps in late summer 489, entering the Venetian plain. Odoacer, ruling from Ravenna, immediately recognized the existential threat. He mobilized his forces and marched north to the Isonzo River. On August 28, 489, the two armies collided. The Battle of Isonzo demonstrated why Theodoric was considered the greatest Germanic commander of his generation. Odoacer commanded approximately 15,000 troops, Germanic foederati and Italian auxiliaries. Theodoric fielded perhaps 20,000 Ostrogothic warriors, battle-hardened from decades fighting in the Balkans. The engagement opened with Odoacer's forces holding defensive positions along the riverbank. Theodoric sent cavalry units upstream and downstream simultaneously, seeking crossing points. When Odoacer shifted troops to counter these flanking movements, Theodoric launched his central assault. The battle raged for most of the day. Odoacer's lines held initially, but the Ostrogothic pressure was relentless. By late afternoon, Theodoric's cavalry had crossed the river north of Odoacer's position and wheeled south, threatening encirclement. Odoacer, facing annihilation, ordered a fighting withdrawal. His army retreated southward toward Verona, maintaining cohesion but having lost the first engagement. Casualties numbered in the thousands on both sides. Odoacer reached Verona on the Adige River and prepared defensive fortifications. The city's Roman walls, built centuries earlier, still stood formidable. Theodoric pursued rapidly, unwilling to give his opponent time to consolidate. On September 30th, 489, the armies clashed again outside Verona's walls. This battle was bloodier than Isonzo. Odoacer's forces, fighting with their backs to the city, defended desperately. Theodoric's Ostrogoths assaulted the field fortifications repeatedly throughout the day. Roman historians later recorded that the Adige ran red, likely exaggeration but indicating substantial casualties. The turning point came when a portion of Odoacer's Italian auxiliaries, seeing the battle turn against them, broke and fled. The collapse of one sector cascaded. Odoacer's line disintegrated. Odoacer himself barely escaped. He retreated into Verona briefly, then fled eastward toward his capital at Ravenna, leaving Verona to Theodoric. But he couldn't reach Ravenna directly. Theodoric's forces controlled the main routes. Instead, Odoacer diverted south to Mediolanum, modern Milan, attempting to rally support in western Italy. Theodoric had won 2 major battles in 5 weeks, but he hadn't won the war. Odoacer still controlled Ravenna, the symbolic seat of power. More critically, Ravenna was nearly impregnable. Built on coastal marshlands with fortifications accessible only by narrow causeways, the city could withstand siege indefinitely as long as its harbor remained open for supply ships. For 3 years, Italy descended into grinding warfare. Theodoric controlled most of northern Italy, Verona, Mediolanum, Ticinum. Odoacer held Ravenna and portions of the Po Valley. Neither commander could deliver a knockout blow. The conflict shifted to siege warfare, raids, and alliance building among Italian cities and Roman aristocrats. On August 11, 490, the stalemate broke temporarily at the Battle of the Adda River. Odoacer, attempting to break out from his diminishing territory, assembled forces and marched westward. Theodoric intercepted him along the Adda, a tributary of the Po. The battle was smaller than Isonzo or Verona, perhaps 10,000 men per side, but decisive. Theodoric's tactical superiority shone again. He drew Odoacer into attacking his center while his cavalry enveloped both flanks. Odoacer's army shattered. He fled back to Ravenna with the remnants of his forces. Now Theodoric could focus entirely on Ravenna. In late 490, he surrounded the city and began a siege that would last nearly 3 years. Ravenna's defenses were formidable, but Theodoric was patient. He built fortifications blocking the landward approaches. He negotiated with Constantinople to deny Odoacer's supply ships access to Ravenna's port. Most critically, he systematically conquered every other significant city in Italy, isolating Ravenna completely. Inside Ravenna, conditions deteriorated. Food supplies dwindled. Odoacer's remaining troops faced starvation. By early 493, the situation was hopeless. Odoacer opened negotiations. The terms, mediated by the Bishop of Ravenna, seemed generous. Theodoric and Odoacer would rule Italy jointly, sharing power as co-kings. On March 5, 493, Theodoric entered Ravenna. For 10 days, the arrangement held. Theodoric and Odoacer appeared together publicly. Then on March 15th, Theodoric invited Odoacer to a banquet at the palace in Ravenna. What happened next remains historically controversial but became legendary. During the feast, Theodoric's men seized Odoacer. According to the contemporary historian Jordanes, Theodoric himself struck the first blow, reportedly saying, "This is what you did to my friends." Odoacer was killed, along with his brother Hunwulf and his most loyal commanders. Theodoric's soldiers then systematically executed Odoacer's remaining supporters throughout the city. It was political assassination masquerading as justice. Theodoric couldn't afford co-rulership. Italy couldn't support 2 competing courts, 2 armies, 2 administrative structures. The joint kingship was always fiction. Theodoric had simply waited until he controlled Ravenna completely before eliminating his rival. By late March 493, Theodoric was the undisputed king of Italy. He commanded the entire Italian peninsula, Sicily, and portions of the Dalmatian coast. The Ostrogothic kingdom was born in blood and pragmatism, but it would become the most successful Romano-Germanic synthesis of the early Middle Ages. Theodoric established his capital at Ravenna, occupying the same palace where Odoacer had ruled. He governed through existing Roman administrative structures, employing Roman senators, maintaining Roman law codes, and presenting himself as the legitimate successor to imperial authority in the West. He preserved Roman culture while maintaining Ostrogothic military dominance, a delicate balance that would define his 33-year reign. The confrontation between Odoacer and Theodoric wasn't simply a power struggle between two warlords. It represented a fundamental question: what would succeed Roman authority in the West? Odoacer's model, Germanic military commander operating Roman systems, had failed. Theodoric's model, barbarian king consciously synthesizing Roman and Germanic elements, would set the pattern for medieval European kingship. The age of the barbarian warlords had truly begun. Theodoric's conquest of Italy established the blueprint for barbarian kingship in post-Roman Europe, but his kingdom was only one piece of a larger transformation. By 500 AD, the Western Mediterranean had been completely reconfigured into Germanic successor kingdoms, each developing unique relationships with Roman legacy. The Ostrogothic kingdom of Italy under Theodoric flourished between 493 and his death in 526. Theodoric maintained Roman administrative efficiency while ensuring Ostrogothic military supremacy. He appointed Cassiodorus, a Roman senator, as his chief administrator. He preserved Roman tax systems, aqueducts, and public buildings. He patronized learning and the arts. His court at Ravenna became a center of late antique culture, where Roman aristocrats and Gothic warriors intermingled. Theodoric's great achievement was governing approximately 5 million Roman subjects, with only 100,000 Ostrogoths through compromise rather than coercion. Yet tensions remained. Ostrogoths and Romans didn't intermarry, maintained separate legal systems, and practiced different forms of Christianity. The Ostrogoths were Arian Christians, while most Romans were Nicene Catholics, a religious divide that would eventually undermine the kingdom. The Visigothic kingdom reached its apex under Alaric II in the early 500s, controlling most of Hispania and southern Gaul. But in 507, the Franks under King Clovis, a Catholic convert, invaded Visigothic territory. At the Battle of Vouillé near Poitiers, Clovis defeated and killed Alaric II, conquering most of Visigothic Gaul. The Visigoths retreated into Iberia, where they would rule until the Islamic conquests of the 8th century. Their kingdom survived but diminished. The Vandal kingdom in North Africa endured until 533, when the Byzantine Emperor Justinian, seeking to restore imperial authority in the West, sent his general Belisarius to reconquer the province. The Vandals, weakened by internal succession disputes, collapsed within months. Byzantine forces destroyed Vandal power completely, the only major barbarian kingdom that didn't survive into the medieval period. The Burgundian kingdom was absorbed by the Frankish Empire in 534, but the Franks under the Merovingian dynasty became the most enduring successor state. Clovis and his descendants consolidated power across Gaul, converting to Catholic Christianity, which gave them legitimacy among Roman subjects. The Frankish kingdom would eventually evolve into the Carolingian Empire and ultimately into medieval France and Germany. These kingdoms didn't restore Roman unity, they definitively ended it. But neither did they erase Roman civilization. Instead, they created hybrid societies, Germanic military aristocracies ruling Romanized populations, Latin language adapting to Germanic influences, Roman law blending with tribal customs, Christian theology absorbing both traditions. The barbarian warlords who took over the West didn't destroy Rome. They became its unexpected heirs, preserving fragments of Roman culture while building something fundamentally new: medieval Europe. The transformation was complete. The Roman West was gone. The barbarian kingdoms had arrived. The historical reconstruction of this period relies on a limited but revealing collection of contemporary sources. Jordanes Gittica, written in Constantinople around 551, provides our primary narrative of Theodoric's conquest of Italy, though it must be read critically given Jordanes' pro-Gothic perspective. Cassiodorus, Theodoric's Roman administrator, left extensive official correspondence in his Varii, offering invaluable insight into how the Ostrogothic kingdom actually functioned. The Chronicle of Marcellinus Comes provides Eastern imperial perspective on Western events, while Procopius's Wars of Justinian contains detailed descriptions of the Vandal and Ostrogothic kingdoms, albeit written from a Byzantine viewpoint decades later. Modern scholarship has revolutionized our understanding of this period. Peter Heather's The Fall of the Roman Empire and Brian Ward Perkins' The Fall of Rome and the End of Civilization offer contrasting interpretations of the transformation from Roman to barbarian rule. Patrick Geary's The Myth of Nations challenges traditional narratives about Germanic tribal identities. Guy Halsall's Barbarian Migrations in the Roman West provides the most current archaeological and historical synthesis. These works collectively demonstrate that the barbarian invasions were far more complex than simple military conquest. They represented demographic shifts, cultural synthesis, and political transformation occurring over generations. The casualty figures from Theodoric's Italian campaign remain estimates. Ancient sources rarely provide reliable numbers, and modern historians debate the scale of these battles. The Battle of Isonzo likely involved 30,000 to 40,000 combatants total, with casualties perhaps reaching 20 to 30% for the losing side, 3 to 5,000 dead and wounded. The 3-year siege of Ravenna probably killed more through starvation and disease than combat. Overall, Theodoric's conquest of Italy may have cost 10,000 to 15,000 military casualties across both sides, with civilian deaths from associated disruptions difficult to quantify. What's undeniable is the historical significance. The period between 476 and 500 AD witnessed the definitive transition from Roman to post-Roman Europe. The barbarian warlords who carved kingdoms from Roman provinces weren't destroyers, they were state builders. They created political structures that would evolve into medieval kingdoms and eventually modern European nations. They preserved Latin literacy, Roman law, and Christian theology even as they transformed these traditions. They were simultaneously Rome's conquerors and its continuators. If you found this exploration of the barbarian kingdoms fascinating, the story doesn't end here. The Ostrogothic kingdom would face its own crisis when Byzantine Emperor Justinian attempted reconquest in the 530s, triggering a devastating 20-year war. The Frankish kingdom would produce Charlemagne crowned Roman emperor in 800. The Visigothic kingdom would fall to Islamic conquest in 711. Each successor kingdom has its own epic narrative. History isn't about civilizations dying, it's about transformations. Rome didn't end in 476. It changed, and those barbarian warlords? They became kings, and their kingdoms became Europe.